The NIL deal. With all the controversy that this one aspect of college football has had in its extremely short lifespan, we have heard almost everyone's opinion on it by now. From coaches to analysts, everyone has something to say about this thing, and rightfully so. Whether you like it or not, it has already drastically changed the landscape of college football and more specifically the recruiting process. Personally, I don't have a problem with it because I think that if athletes are able to profit off of what they bring to the table, then they should. It might not be the NFL, but people are just as desperate to buy these guys' jerseys, autographs, and more. In fact, there's one instance that comes to my mind every time I think of the NIL deal, but that's neither here nor there. But as you can guess, when the NIL deal is abused, it clearly becomes a problem. There's a lot of situations we can look to for evidence of this, but there's only one that crosses my mind, and that is the Texas A&M 2022 recruiting class. Most of y'all know that this recruiting class is the greatest of all time, and while that is sketchy in itself since it was the first time ever the NIL deal was in the conversation during the recruiting process, that's not where my problem lies. My issue starts and practically ends with the man running the show at Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher. A man who claims to do everything by the book and ethically, but one look at his actions directly contradicts that. So in this video, we will look at his career decisions along with the dumpster fire that is the Texas A&M football program. So let's get into it. We'll start off by talking about the recruiting class that I mentioned earlier. This class was absolutely stacked because, as I said, it was the greatest of all time. 8 5-stars, 19 4-stars, just all the way around a dream recruiting class for any coach. But here's the thing. A great recruiting class means absolutely nothing if those players don't translate to the field, and that's exactly what happened. In just week 2 of the season, they hosted Appalachian State, and in a game that they were favored to win by 18.5 points, they lost. They actually lost, bro. The number 6 team in the country, fresh off the greatest recruiting class of all time, had already fumbled the bag in week 2. But we'll focus on their season in a second. For now, let's look at the recruiting process that they went through. As y'all might know, some people, namely Nick Saban, felt that Jimbo obtained all these recruits because he bought them, and for good reason. As any rational person would think, it's of course sketchy that Texas A&M just happened to have the best recruiting class of all time as soon as the NIL is in the conversation after not having a notable recruiting class before that. Jimbo Fisher claimed this: "We never bought anybody. No rules were broken. Nothing was done wrong."
Y'all getting a lot of money from these schools. Y'all decided to go play.
So after a bunch of controversy over this video surfaced and just proved to people what they already thought to be true, that Texas A&M was buying their players. And look, it's one thing to not go by the book and do things in a crooked or wrong way, like that's bad enough, but to do that while claiming how innocent you are and to be so offended at even the mention of an accusation makes it so much worse. To add to his claims of innocence, he also took a shot at Saban himself by saying this: "It's despicable that a reputable head coach can come out and say this when things don't go his way, or he doesn't get his way. The narcissist in him doesn't allow those things to happen, and it's ridiculous when he's not on top." He added to that by saying, "You can call me anything you want to call me. You don't call me a cheat. I don't cheat. I don't lie. I learned that when I was a kid. If you did, your old man would have slapped you upside the head. Maybe somebody should have slapped him." And after all that talk, he just straight up got exposed in this video. Like, dude, this is why you're not respected. There's a reason Nick Saban is the greatest coach of all time, and guess what? It's not because he's a narcissist. So if I were him, I'd watch my tone when insulting a coach who, 1, actually does recruit players by selling them on the greatness of his school instead of NIL deals, and 2, is so much better at his job than you will ever be. To add salt to the wound, the team as a whole underachieved so hard this past season, which ultimately falls on the coaches. Now granted, they did have a lot of injuries to deal with, but that only gets you off the hook for so long. Along with the App State loss, which was just straight up embarrassing, other notable losses include when they lost to an unranked Mississippi State while being ranked number 17, an unranked South Carolina, an unranked Florida that lost to Vanderbilt, and a loss to an equally as bad Auburn team. To add to this, in their second to last regular season game, they played UMass and ended up winning 20-3, but the score was 10-3 at halftime. UMass, bro. Debatably the worst team in all of college football this year. They were absolutely horrid. Their QB had a QBR of 17.8 and didn't even reach 800 passing yards on the entire year. Along with that, he threw 4 times as many interceptions as he did touchdowns. Like hot garbage, dumpster fire bad. And this powerhouse SEC school, who, shall I remind you again, had just had the greatest recruiting class of all time, was in a dogfight with them at halftime. So you'd think that the fans would care since it was a close game, even though their competition was bad. They'd probably hope to win a game no matter what. Nah. This is what their stadium looked like at halftime. Bro, look at this. This is the saddest thing I have ever seen, as well as extremely embarrassing. But honestly, as an Alabama fan, after the comments he made about Nick Saban, I can't describe to you how satisfying this was to see. But this team didn't just have problems on the field, but off of it as well. Before the South Carolina game, 3 players from that 2022 recruiting class were allegedly smoking weed in the locker room. This is not your typical misconduct, bro. We are talking about illegal contraband in a locker room before an actual game against an SEC opponent. Another incident happened prior to the Miami game when 4 players were suspended for curfew violations. Even though this is not as bad as smoking weed in your locker room, it's still a violation of rules. It speaks volume about Jimbo that he hasn't obtained the respect of his players enough that they would refrain from smoking illegal drugs in his locker room on a game day. This is also the result of getting players to come to your school by promising them a fat NIL deal instead of selling them on the integrity of your program. But I guess you can't do that if your program doesn't possess integrity. So when I think of Jimbo Fisher, I think of someone who will do anything to appear successful, even if that includes lying and cheating. Notice that I said appear successful and not be successful, because as we can see from this past season, he was not in the least bit successful. This is a man who lacks my respect as well as the respect of many others, and obviously his players. I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to like and share it, as that helps the channel to grow. Besides that, until next time.